Hey, welcome back to part 2. So here's what I decided to do. This is a salvage transmission. It's only got like 50-some thousand miles on it. This is from a 2015 Fusion Energi. It's a slightly different part number than the 2013s and 2014s. 2013s and 2014s are supposed to be a certain transmission. 2015s and 2016s are supposed to be a certain transmission. But I did a lot of research, and this is going to fit. And I'll explain that to you right now. Look, I know a lot of YouTube viewers like to just cut to the chase and see things happen, but this is important. Follow me here. This is a screenshot out of the technical service bulletin on the issues with this transmission. I'll link that technical service bulletin down in the description below, but a couple things to look at here. You see the green lines under the remanufactured transmission assembly, 2.57 gas electric, 2013-2014 C-Max Fusion FHEV. Same thing down below. It's 2.57 for the FHEV. What that means is that's the gas electric car that is not the plug-in. The 2.57 is the final drive ratio. So very important that those match up. All right, so then the red lines, that's what I'm working on. It's a 2.91 final drive ratio for a PHEV. That's the plug-in hybrid. Let's look at the part number on my transmission that failed. So here's the sticker on the transmission that failed. DM587000DD. The D is the year it was made. 7000 is transmission. And then DD talks about like revision numbers. But up in the upper right hand corner you see it says PHEV 2.91. That means that's the final drive ratio. And here is the part number sticker on the replacement transmission that I will be putting in. FM587000DA. Again, the F is like a year or two newer than the D, obviously. I don't know if they put an E, but it's bare minimum a year newer. And in the upper right-hand corner, you see it's PHEV 2.91. Same final drive ratio. These transmissions match up like for like. This one is going to go in.
Let's do it.
Okay, this is obviously incredibly hard to film. You just kind of got to do it. So the way I did this was I hooked the chain up to this hook on top of the transmission here. And then I hooked a ratchet strap to the other side. And I'll go underneath for you. And that ratchet strap just hooks down here. And basically that allows me to tilt the transmission. Let me zoom out just a little bit here. It allows me to tilt the transmission, back. As I was just lifting it up with that one eyelet, the transmission was too far this way. So I needed to rotate it towards the back of the car. If you were staring at the crankshaft there, I'd be needed to go clockwise. Okay? But it is in. You can see I've got these two bolts in on the bottom, this bolt here. There's another one just on the other side here. I went up here underneath the thermostat. There's a bolt right there. And you can see it, I'm pointing at it, there's a bolt right there. I'm going to go ahead now and disconnect this, get it all out of my way, the cherry picker here, and go around and torque all the bolts, transmission to engine right now. Alright, all of the transmission to engine bolts or engine to transmission bolts are torqued down. Next, I'm going to start getting some of this wiring together. Let me look down here. So there's this round plug that we're going to put on here. And once that goes on, you just counterclockwise that guy on there. There's some fir trees like up here and down there that I'll press those into. Then I'm going to go down and bolt the thermostat and the auxiliary pump, the electric transmission fluid pump. It's down there. Let's move down there. Alright, I'll move around the transmission here and show you what's done. Thermostat was bolted back to the transmission. You got an 8mm bolt here, 8mm bolt there. The cooler block was bolted back to the transmission. It's a 10mm bolt right there. I'm touching it. Then on top there's another 10mm bolt to connect this line. This line goes to the auxiliary pump right here. I'm touching it. I've plugged it back in, put the harness back on its little mount there. There are 3 8mm bolts here on the side in like a triangle. This line, moving around here, bolts underneath here. It's a 10mm bolt. Put the ground cable back on. You got this large cable here that snakes back and it presses into the transmission there and there. Now I'm going to go up top and bolt on the water outlet housing. And there is the water outlet pipe on. You got a hose, you got a finagle on over on this side. Looks like a heater core line over here, and then a vent pipe here. And then you got 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, and it's hard to see, but 4 right down there. That one is hard to get to. That's not the right bolt. You can't even see it. It's underneath here. Good luck. That's a tough one. All right, let's get the EV electric cables plugged into this transmission, bolted down, and sitting up here. The main power cables are back in. One down here, you got 3 8mm bolts. One up here, 3 8mm bolts. Make sure you route them through here, put a couple zip ties back in where they go. Come up here, and then just get them ready to hook up to the inverter transmission control module. Next, I'm going to put the selector lever back on, selector cable. Quick note, part of the bracket that it rides in, before you put this heater core hose on, put this bracket on. It's really basically going to get this bolt in. It's 13mm bolts, part of the transmission casing bolts hold this bracket on. So get this on before you put the heater core hose on. All right, let's get this cable on. Gear selector cable is on. Mounts back here on this bracket that I was just talking about, and then snakes down into here. So this bracket, don't mess with that bolt, but underneath here there is 2 10mm bolts. Let's see if I can show you from the bottom. It's hard for me to hold this camera steady, but 10mm bolt here, 10mm bolt there, and then press this grommet onto the selector lever. I was going to do the subframe next, but I'm going to put the tray in, and the transmission control module inverter goes right up top here. So you got 2 studs that you're looking at back here. There's one, there's the other, and then 2 bolt holes right down here. Let's set the tray in. All right, sorry about the noise in the background. The neighbor's doing some landscaping. This is the tray that is in. It's actually 6 bolts, 2 right there, 13mm. The 2 nuts that I mentioned back there, 13mm, and then 2 right here on the side. Okay, let's get the transmission control module and inverter and set it in. The TCM is in. There's 3 bolts. You got a 13mm bolt up here in front. You got one right there, and then you got one on this side. So move this tank off to the side so you can get to that bolt. All right, let's get the wires that you see I pulled them back up and out of the way. Let's get these wires in the tray, zip tied down, coolant bottle back on, coolant lines on in the front, electrical connections on in the front, electrical connections on in the back. All right, this thing is wired for sound. You got the coolant lines clipped on the front right there. You got these electrical connections in the front. On the one on the left, remember you have to remove this cover up top here, this bolt right here, take that off. and pull that cover off, and there'll be a bolt underneath there that bolts that left connection in. The bolt on the right not only keeps the cover on, but also goes into the connection on the right. Keep going around here. These main cables, they are on 8mm bolts, 3 of them each cable. All right, electrical connections in the back, those are on. I think this is looking pretty darn good. Alright, subframe time. This is one of the more difficult portions of this job, especially not having a lift and doing this on the ground. So I wheeled the subframe in on a 4-wheel dolly. You see that dolly down there. Then I lifted the front of the subframe up and slid a jack under that side and a jack under that side. And I'll be lifting the subframe up into place. I'm going to show you a couple tips before I do that. So before jacking it up, I went ahead and put the sway bar in, screwed it in a few threads on this side and on that side, same thing on the passenger side, and connected it. There's a bracket that goes up here, but right now I just got this nut on here loose. This way it'll help guide me up into place as I lift it up. Alright, so here I am on the passenger side, and once again, like I mentioned over there, I got the bolts into this sway bar bushing, a few threads, and got the sway bar link connected just by a few threads with this nut up here to the shock, again to help guide me. Alright, and I got the steering rack sitting on top of the subframe. As I get up to a certain distance, I'll probably stop and start the 2 bolts. One over here, one on the other side, just 2 bolts holding that thing to the subframe. Get those started, a few threads, and then get it up the rest of the way. Not going to be able to film this, so I'll get back with you as soon as it's up and in place. Okay, she's in. The key to this is having patience. Right? It actually isn't that hard, it's just bulky and moves around on you, so just keep it balanced as you go up. You know, a couple pumps on the jack over here, a couple pumps on the jack over here, and walk it up. And as soon as you can, look up here, get a bolt in a couple threads, and then go to the other side over there to get a bolt in a couple threads, and then next thing you know, you got her up and in. So you get the transmission mount here that you got to bolt in as it goes up. This easiest way to get this out is this aluminum bolt. I had an issue and had to undo the whole thing, but I got this bolt free now, and it's that's how you should remove it and put it back in. Then back here, you've got your 2 sway bar mount bolts here. You have a power steering rack bolt here. Mirror image on the other side, you got a power steering rack bolt here, and then the 2 sway bar bolts here. It also bolts the control arm to the subframe. And back here, this is a little bit tricky. This is what you want to do in stages. You can get this bolt in as you're getting the thing up, and you get all 4 bolts in. Then pull one of these back out and get this brace in and crank it down, and then pull this bolt out and put it in. Okay, kind of walking it in. Then don't forget back here you've got your exhaust hanger. It's got 2 10mm bolts. I'm touching one there, and then one over to here. And these are 18mm nuts. You don't have to take those off to get that out. Now that that is up and in, we will go ahead and get the axles in. So we'll get the axle in on this side, and then the axle in on the driver's side. And here is the driver's side axle in. This one's just got a C-clip on this side, so just be careful you don't damage the transmission seal on the way in. I put a little Vaseline on it just to make sure it's nice and lubricated going in. So you clip that in till you hear it click. And then I went ahead and did everything over on this side. But to get the axle in, you will need to pull this hub down towards you. And then you can fit the this axle in the back side here. Put this nut on. This is 1.25 inch size nut. Alright. Then you put the hub back up and you tap these 2 bolts in. Remember they had some splines to hold themselves, so hammer those back in. This is 24 millimeter nuts on the back side. Cinch those down. And then I put the brake caliper on. Okay, you just got some Allen hex bolts that are your slide bolts. Screw those back on. Put the caps back on. Don't forget your spring clip here. It hooks in there, there. It sits on the outside there and there. And the tie rod end is right here. This is a 21 millimeter nut. Put that through, zip it down. And then just snake your wheel speed sensor, ABS sensor back in. Clips into the shock here. Clips in here. And then sits in there and then plugs in. Lastly, you can put this bracket in with the sway bar link. Okay, a lot of stuff, but pretty straightforward. Let's go to the other side. Passenger side axle is in. So this is a solid axle up until this point with this carrier bearing here. So again, being careful not to cut the seal. Slide this in here to around here. Then there's this sealed bearing inside of here. And you got this bracket that goes across there with two 13 millimeter bolts. Then let me get out to the other side here. And then again, it's just the same thing on this side. So with this hub unbolted, you would pull it forward. You would get the CV axle into the splines here, and then push this back. This will protrude through. Put your couple bolts in here. Again, you tap these in with the splines. 24 millimeter nuts there and there. You got the tie rod in here, 21 millimeter nut. Zip that down. You got another 18 millimeter nut up here with this bracket, and then the ABS wheel speed sensor wire. What else? Caliper. Again, you got the hex bolts for the slides here. One there and one on the bottom. I got the plastic cap already on. And then again, this is like 1.25 inch, maybe 32 millimeter, but 1.25 inch nut. Zips that down just fine. Boy, these rotors really got rusty. I had this subframe sitting outside just for space in the garage. I did notice, unfortunately, the stabilizer bar, sway bar link is broken on me when I went to put it up here. I felt it pop off down here, so it looks like this thing was on its way out, failing. So I will have to I'll have to get another one of those and replace it. But that's for another day. We're gonna keep moving on. Next thing I'm gonna do is put the radiator support on up underneath here. Radiator support is in. It's just two 13 millimeter bolts here, and then on the other side, make sure you lube up the grommet to get the radiator in down here. And then you got some fir trees that hold this felt. In retrospect, I should have just pulled these off and pulled the whole felt down with this, but whatever. Got these fir trees back in to hold the this felt. I imagine this is just some kind of air diverter. Make sure the air goes through the condenser and radiator instead of coming down here. Anyway, you'll see some witness marks where this was. Just match those up. And one more important thing, let me go up top here real quick. This is really hard to film, but this is up top. This will be the driver's side top of the radiator. Over here, there is a... Gosh, I'm not going to even be able to point at it. Let me circle this for you. That right there, that is what needs to go into a grommet. So there's a black plastic nipple that's right there or whatever, that little shaft that needs to go into a rubber grommet right there. And that's on both sides. All right, let's get the air intake components on. This particular engine, the air filter housing and mass airflow sensor is kind of built into the engine cover. So we'll put that on first. A little bit of Vaseline. Always recommend this. These little, what do you call them, nipples or whatever these mounts are for it, just so you don't hurt the rubber of the actual unit that you're putting on. All right, let's get it on. Poof, there it is. All right, you got 5 little mounts that you push that down on, and then you have a 7 millimeter bolt over here and a 7 millimeter bolt here. Secures it down. Now we're going to do some air ducting. So we've I got a hose that is going to go from here to the fresh air intake, and then we got another air intake hose that is going to go from here into the throttle body, and there's like a vacuum line. I'm going to throw those on real quick and show you what that looks like. Okay, all that stuff is on. You got two 7mm bolts, same size as these guys, holding this on here. Well, the first pipe you put on is the pipe from the mass airflow sensor down to the throttle body. Tighten those hose clamps, 7mm as well. Then you got this, I might have called it a vacuum hose, but this is a positive crankcase ventilation hose. So clip it in the back first. It's just right into the valve cover. There's a little seat where it goes in here for the fir tree, then clip it onto there. Then you put on this hose, put it in here, set it down in there, put those two 7mm bolts in. All right, now let's just put the air filter in. And there we go, easy peasy. We are almost done. If you're still hanging with me, thank you. All right, let's fill some fluids, starting with the transmission fluid. Okay, here we are in the driver's side wheel well. Peel this back here. This plug right here, it's just above the grounding bolt. This plug right here, it looks like it's a structural bolt for the transmission. It's not. That's over here. This right here is the fill plug. Let me get this out. All right, I took you off the stand. Maybe this will be a little bit easier to see. It's out. It's right there. It's a 14mm plug. Pull that out. Let's get some fluid in there. There's probably a few different ways to fill transmissions like this. You can probably run a hose down there and a funnel and like let it gravity feed. This is how I like to do it. I just get myself a bug sprayer, fill it full of transmission fluid, squeeze it on in. I'll get back with you. Once it starts dribbling out of that hole, we know that we're full. It should be about 4 quarts or so, I think. Okay, there we go. She's full, at least cold. We're going to leave this wheel off. This is kind of a 2-step process. I'll explain in a second. The fluid I like to use, of course, it calls for Ford Mercon LV. If you look at this here, first one listed, Ford Mercon LV, a whole bunch of other ones. One that's not even listed on here that's a pretty big deal is Lifeguard 6, Lifeguard 8 for those ZF 6 and 8-speed transmissions. Valvoline is not paying me. I wish they were, but I like this stuff so much, I'll give them a plug. This is really great transmission fluid. Works for a lot of different vehicles. Okay, continue filling fluids. Let's fill the coolant for the actual engine and then the coolant for the inverter transmission control module. Coolants are filled. I took like 1.5 gallons over here. I filled it up to the max line just because once I start this engine, I'll leave the cap off, let it run, let it burp, and come out of there. This guy here hardly took any at all, maybe like a quart or something. Granted, not much drained out, right? It's just what was in the hoses up here, because once I disconnected these coolant hoses down here, I basically just left these upright and set them off to the side, so most of the coolant stayed in the TCM inverter system. So not much in there, about 1.5 gallons over there. Let's re-enable these batteries. Okay, here's the hybrid big electric battery. Remember we had this safety thing that we pulled out to disable the battery. Just take a quick look. The lines in there, match them up to the lines in here. Label should be basically facing up. Help it in. There we go. Let's do the internal combustion engine battery. Okay, the small battery in the back here for the internal combustion engine is hooked up, but it's only got like 9 volts, which really is disappointing to me because it's a fairly new battery, and I had just charged it with this terminal off, so it should have been good, but I know it charged up to almost 13 volts and then sat here a couple weeks and it's down to 9, so I'm going to have to replace that battery. So for now, we're going to jump start this thing. Timeout. Stop. I need to explain a few things here. What I just connected is not the internal combustion engine battery, it's the low voltage battery. I'm used to working on hybrids. In hybrids they call that 12 volt battery the low voltage battery because it's 12 volts, and then the hybrid battery because it's much more volts as the high voltage battery. This car does not have a traditional starter. It's started by an electric motor inside of the transmission, right? There's two motors in there. There's a motor that is like basically the alternator and starter. And then there's another motor that's the actual drive motor that drives the car. So you have to have the high voltage battery charged. It has to have some power to start the internal combustion engine. So I went ahead and replaced the low voltage battery with a new one, because I just told you it was not holding its charge. And after I did that, I could not get this car to charge. It just gave me the flashing ring of death. Here, I'll show you what that looks like. Yeah, that is that's a charging fault. And I kept doing research over and over again. I couldn't figure it out. And you ever have those moments where you're like, man, I'm an idiot? Let me show you. It's this tab right here. So after you lever this thing in, make sure you push this tab in towards the driver's side. Totally forgot that. Yes, that was the mistake I made. You have to not only lever that safety disconnect in, but you have to also push the tab over. Anyway, I'm going to let this thing charge. You can see this blinky light here. It's pretty low on charge. Once it pulsates for a while and gets to 25%, it'll go solid. And then the next quadrant, and the next quadrant until the whole thing's solid. Once that's done, we'll pick this back up. Should take about 7 hours to fully charge this battery, so I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, she's all charged up back here underneath the car. Remember me saying leave the wheel off? Because I'll show you what I want to do at the end. That's what I'm doing. Here's the transmission fill plug. Of course, this is in the way right there. It's out. And no fluids dripping out. So basically, after charging it, just ran this car through the gears, through drive and reverse, and made sure the fluid's all moving through there. Pulled that plug out, and we're going to just top this thing off. Alright, and there's the fill plug back in. Glad I did that. It took about half of a quart or so. Alright, let's get the wheel back on. Take this thing for a drive. There's not a whole lot left to say. It's done. It's going out on the road. Tested for 1,000, 2,000 miles, something like that. Make sure everything's good. Seems pretty darn good to me so far. It's weird how quiet electric cars are. I don't like it. It's weird, but these things are popular, and it gets good gas mileage. I mean, it'll go 40 miles just on the battery. When you hit the brakes, it recharges the battery, of course. And you can plug it in at night, overnight while you're sleeping. I guess it makes sense for some people. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. It's free and it helps us out a lot. Alright? Thanks again. Catch you next time.